chapter Mem Aleph 41, Ayin Beis, volume 1. We begin Discourse 11. Tziyim b'mishpat tipode, Shabbos Pasha Devarim, page Ayin 70. Maimer 11, the Friedrich Rebbe, summary of Teichen Ascholas HaMaimer, the summary of the beginning of this Maimer, is Chochma binah Ayin Beis. The Chochma binah is Ayin Beis. As we've discussed, Ayin literally means nothingness, but in the context of Chassidus, Ayin does not mean nothingness. It means that compared to, from our perspective, it's as if we cannot relate to it. So we say something is something we see. Nothing would be something that we cannot relate to. And Yesh, of course, is substance, which means the substance that we relate to. So in the context of where we are, overall, the Rebbe Rashab now is discussing the structure of Seder Shtalshalos, of the cosmic order. This is the structure of existence, the building blocks, which he designates as being Eir Pnimi. It's essentially integrated energy, which means, in the language of Chassidus, Eris within Kelim. In simple English, it means that everything in existence has energy, everything has matter, energy and matter. It can be reversed with, you could say, Eir and Keli, light and containers, or light and vessels. A human body has the physical structure of the body, has arms, legs, eyes, ears. These are containers. And the energy within them is what when a person comes alive. Is a live person means that their eyes are functioning and the ears are functioning, each one in their own way. So clearly there's the physical part of the ear and there's the so-called energy part of the ear. Everything. You look at a book, the letters on the page are the containers. The meaning and the ideas that are conveyed through the letters and words is the energy. There's nothing that doesn't have that, these two elements. A computer, a machine. There's the body of the machine, the mechanics, and then there's the inside engineering that makes it work. You don't plug it in, you don't have electricity, you don't have energy. So that's the way the world is created. It's a two forces. Even physics today realizes and recognizes, as Einstein said, E equals mc squared, that energy and matter are reversible. Here, too, in Chassidus, ultimately the goal is to transform matter into energy. But first we have to recognize that they're two separate entities, two separate paths, and that's the central structure that he's discussing here called Eir Pnimi. In Eir Pnimi itself, we've been discussing, after discussing at length the structure of the 10 hidden spheres and where does this originate from in the vision of the author or the artist. We've been discussing the nature of Milo Mata, which means what is conceptual space. Space itself also tells you immediately that there are levels, and levels means that there's levels of what? What are they levels of? So he's defining that it's levels of containers for sure. One container is different than the other. An ear is different than an eye, for example. The same thing is in spiritual realms. And there's levels of energy. And to use the example he's using specifically in the last few chapters has been Chochma and binah. So Chochma and binah is using as an example to describe two entities that are fundamentally different. And not different relative. It's not like, for example, you have a pot of water, and you take a small cup, you take the big pot and you put it into a small cup. Nothing's changed fundamentally. All you did was diminish the original body. So you could say binah is simply diminished Chochma. It's not correct. Chochma and binah are two distinct entities. It just emphasizes even more how existence is distinct, not just a diminished form of one of another. It's fundamentally gvul, fundamentally structured, fundamental parameters. Chochma has its parameters, binah has its parameters. Briefly, the difference between Chochma and binah is that Chochma is, as he says, is tefus the mohus of something, the essence of something, and binah relates to the mitzias, the substance of it, that it exists. The difference between sight and sound. But as I explained, even though initially when you look at it from Ayin Beis perspective, you could say that it's just an example, he's using an example of Seder Shtalshalos Chochma binah, as I pointed out, the truth is, Chochma binah happens to be a microcosm, the same idea of Gvul and Bli Gvul. So if Ayin Beis is about the interface, to find the interface between heaven and earth, so to speak, between the divine and existence, Chochma binah is more divine, and binah is more mitzias. So in a microcosm, it plays out exactly the same thing. And later in the Hemshech, he's going to discuss it specifically, that Chochma is the place where higher than existence meets existence. So basically, what we have here is that we're up to now the distinction between Chochma and binah as we go into the next Maimer. The last thing we learned, which I just want to make a comment about, the issue of Klippa. We learned about, the end of the Maimer was the discussion of Chochma and binah, as in how they play themselves out in the Parsha Matis, which is the vows. That a vow comes from binah. It means it comes from the structure of existence. So I want to just elaborate one thing, maybe I didn't say it, spell it out, and then add something as well. Why does it come from? It doesn't explain it specifically, but it's pretty obvious. In the structure of existence, where everybody has their limitations, there a person may come to a point of understanding that he is not capable of resisting the temptations of this world. That's the world of binah. In binah, that's possible, because binah is filled of higher and lower. There's gradations. As he said, it's hispashtus. It's not etzem. And therefore, there's a possibility that one person could withstand something someone else can't. A chochem is matris haned, because the chochem has the power, chochma, which is an atzmi, where there's no levels. Atzem is an etzem, has the power to help transform that situation. So he's not just disavowing a vow, it's not just nullifying a vow, but it's also, it's not just getting rid of a vow, it's also a transformation. That's really what Chacham Hataras Anadorim, which is also a deeper understanding. Because in general, the whole neder thing, if you talk purely al pinigla, the whole thing sounds a little strange. I mean, strange. It's not strange, but it's like, think about it. A person can't withstand, so he takes a neder. The Gemara says that better he shouldn't take it. We don't need to add more. Okay, so a person's weak, fine. So you build a siyag again around, fine. Then comes the Chacham Matris Neder. It sounds almost like, so he's bringing it back to square one. So why do you need the Hataras Neder if you took it in order to protect yourself? So why suddenly you getting rid of the neder? If the neder was for 30 days, 30 days are over. Why would you go in the middle of the 30 days and change? Suddenly you don't have temptations anymore. If you think about it. I didn't look it up in Shas and Poskim, but the point I'm making here is that Apichsidis, the whole thing takes on a whole different meaning. And it also gives a much more deeper depth to the whole meaning of Nadarim. Nadarim is actually part of Elam Haz's existence, meaning from Bina, Seder Shtalshalis, is that there's the challenges of life. So Neder is just a reflection of people's challenges. Some people have challenges, they need to take a vow. Chacham Matris Neder is representing that you have the ability to reach a place, like he says, Moshe's Mamshech into Rosh Hashanah, a place, not just back to square one. Okay, you took a Neder, now I'm getting rid of it. Chacham Matris Neder is like saying, I'm giving you the power that you don't need the Neder anymore, that you could actually go into Elam Hazeh, and like the Gemara says, that you don't need the Neder, and you can actually take on the world and not be affected by it. Chochma has that power because it's higher than the structure. That's why it has that power. So even though there's Asis of Chassidus, the truth is it gives a whole different depth even to the whole mitzvah of Nadarim portion. You simply have a take, and the whole Nadarim is like the story of life. This way, Nadarim is like, what's relevant to me, Nadarim? It's relevant to someone who has problems. Other thing I wanted to add was that I interpreted Klippa and Klippas Nega and Klippa Shalosh Klippas Atmeis. The Lashon, by the way, is Eish Lahat and what's the one? Misapechas? Mislakachas. There we go. But Klippas Nega, I looked it up. I interpret Klippas Nega when we were teaching here. Klippas Nega is Klippa is the shell that conceals, but it's Nega. There's still some diminished light. Like let's say the sunset. Nega is like the outer rays. You wrote me glow. But the glow as in like only a glow, not so. As I was looking it up, I remembered that the way they teach it, let's say in English translation in Tanya and so on, they teach Raket, that Klippas Nega means that it's a translucent husk, which means it's a klippa that doesn't completely cover the light, meaning almost Lamal Yusa, that the light is still there. I was saying it's almost like the Yusa, in other words, that there's diminished light. There they look at it more like that there's still light inside of it. So I was looking it up in Eitz Chaim, and it's not so simple. Which way? How would you type klipa snake? Would you? In other words, is it a klipa that's shining, so to speak? That's the way they interpret it. Meaning there's still teiv in it because it can go either way, as we discussed. Or is it the opposite? Is it klipas nega? Because when you type kipshute klipas nega, like he says, it's tachas memshalas nega. It almost sounds like nega is a negative, not a positive. When he says that the whole world is tachas memshalas nega, he doesn't just say klipa. So Eitz Chaim, of course, tachas memshalas. No, here it says tachas memshalas klipas nega. I'm sorry, but a few places he says nega. Anyway, so I'm just pointing that out. I was looking it up a little more. I will get back to you about more details about it. But just interesting, what klipas nega literally means.
Some told me that in Shiva they attached to diminished light.
Diminished. Yeah. But I asked a few people, everyone said the opposite. No, there's no question it's diminished. The question is the focus on that there's only little light, or the focus that there's still light. Anyway, maybe it's a technicality, but if the question is where the original language actually comes from. What does it exactly mean? So Eitz Chaim talks about it specifically. He talks how the Shlosh Klipas Atmeyas, because it's all in the same psukim in Yecheskel. The three are, then he says something like within nega that surrounds them. So you have to really look right. So you have to really find out what the pshat is, how that's then touched in Kabbalah. I'm just saying the process of really doing this properly is to go back to the source, look what the pasuk means, then how Kabbalah is usually in this case Eitz Chaim would be the one that would take the pasuk and explain it al pi Kabbalah. Chassidus already comes afterwards in explaining it.
Noiga is very powerful light. Noiga is a very strong light.
In 100%. In some places, nega is like shenivra b'yem rishon. But I don't know if that's connected to klipas nega, because I looked up in the places about nega. Nega in Chassidus is not klipas nega. Nega is taka very high madrega. There's a pasuk nega in Mishlei, I think. There's actually a pasuk, but that's a different. I don't know if it's klipas nega. Similar word. I didn't see them brought together. Anyway, this is a research project. Let's put it this way. So now we continue on.
Basically, somebody who cannot deal with the challenges, and therefore he abstains from it, right?
Right.
And the Tosafot is he telling me
transformation. He says clear. That's clear. Hasapcha. So, but I want to spell out because binah is so-called bound. That's like Einstein said. You can't change a system from within a system. In Lashon HaChazal, ein chavesh materes atzmei. Meaning, when you're in a system, you're bound by the rules of the system. So you can't change yourself, so to speak. You need something from outside. This is also the Ragachover makes a big thing like this. That's why you need a pul nimshachas, for example, to bring two opposites together. Because you need constant energy from somewhere outside. If two opposites are naturally different, what's keeping them together? So you have to have a force outside. They can't keep themselves together because they by nature repel each other. Pul nimshachas, so on. Kriyas Yamsuf is that way, that you need the Ruach Kodim all night, etc. So the same thing is here, that to change a system, so what you can do within the system is avoid, abstain. But to transform, you need something from outside the system.
The fortified walls around.
Yeah. There's also the Rebbe's famous Sikha in Rambam, the Rambam Hadar and Rambam Lamed Hey, which is one of the most Meidike ones, where the Rebbe says that why in Sefer Halachas is the Rambam bringing the second halacha, the imhu ein motzei, v'im yalal adash hu ein motzei ein dover acha yochlim motzes. So the Rebbe teaches that what's the yalal das, that the Eibush is lamayla from geder motzei, meaning like Sefer Kalam and Lashon of Chassidus. When the Rebbe edited that sikh, he did not allow any Chassidus to be in the Pnim. Everything is in the footnotes. So everything inside the thing is only a Lashon from the Rambam. And the Rebbe explains, why is that negeya? Why is negeya to know that God is beyond existence? We're talking halachas here. Halachas is about existence. So the Rebbe says, because halacha is not just to do what God wants and align, so to speak, the material world according to Ratzon Elyon, it's also to change the material world. And you can't change the material world without going back to a level that's beyond existence. That's why you have every mitzvah has what you're allowed to do with it, and the leisaseh, so to speak. So the mitzvah chiyuv that hu motzei tells you can change, you can bring godliness into a particular chefza and make it into a chefza of kedusha. But how could you change chayil to kedush? They're two different worlds. So you need something to go back to the engineering room, so to speak, to Einem Motzei, outside of the system, and bring that can help you transform the material world. It's an unbelievable sikh. Just giving an example. But let's continue now. So into Chochma binah. As I said, Chochma binah is both an example for Seder Shtalshlus and Lamayla Miseder Shtalshlus, meaning two fundamental different entities, like he's been discussing, that they're defined by what distinguishes, what makes Maila Mata, what makes something higher or lower in the spiritual worlds, conceptually, it's its state of energy, it's its degree of energy. It has more energy, it's higher. If it's closer to the source, it has more energy. Kiruv and Richuk, Miyut and Riboy and Miyut. And Chochma binah is the example he's been using from basically all the way from chapter Lamed Ches, I believe. Yeah, the end of Lamed Ches and Lamed Tes and Mem, and he continues. So we're still in Chochma binah. I just wanted to put it in context. And as I said, it's also a microcosm, an example of everything he's been discussing, because it goes back to is Atzilus, meaning the structure of existence. Is it Gilei Helam? Is it revealing that which is there already? Meaning, is it closer to Lakus or is it closer to existence?
But that level of godliness that bound us up to the laws of nature needs a higher degree of divine to distract.
It's a very good question. Yes, yeah. That's why you have sometimes Shem Elikim and you need a Shem Havaya, like even in Chumash. It says 26 times Shem Elikim, Breishis Bar Elikim. Then it says B'yem Aseis Hashem Elikim Hashemayim V'aretz. So essentially, even Elikim, Kav Yochel, we're talking about after the Eibishter chose that Elikim should be Keich HaGvul, obviously Havaya Hu Elikim at the end of the day. And that's why we're Miyachid both. But if you talk about from the perspective of how things should happen, the Tzimtzum, if Havaya was radiating during the Tzimtzum, you wouldn't have a Tzimtzum. Tzimtzum is Keich Elikim. He speaks in Shaykh Vamun a lot about this. Then comes the Eibishter wants, let's say, Hamshach of Matan Teira, so you have like so-called Havaya enters into the picture. Why can't Elikim just access its so-called source in the engineering room? Because that would disturb the whole system. Even a Nes doesn't completely suspend all the laws.
It explains a lot of like destruction.
This explains why you say Kosher Kriyas Yamsuf. Why Kosher?
But catastrophic destruction that you witness in the world. That's basically people that's God allow that.
Yeah, but you don't want to say, but
higher level. It's just not bringing the higher level. He's allowing the
that's true, but the problem there is a different one. Why is God Hashgacha Pratis? He's watching. Why doesn't he have Rachmanis? And why doesn't he intervene? No, it basically explains the Ayin Beis why the world functions according to certain rules. But it's not God has left the world work on like a machine. That's how he's working. He works that way, and he will not suspend that. Even when he suspends, even Kriyas Yamsuf, it says with Haruach Kodim. You're already making a miracle. What do you need the wind for? Because even that in other words, the biggest ness is never complete the annihilation of all the laws. It's a suspension of some of the laws and so on. Shemesh be given dame. It's taking the shemesh and stopping it. There's a lot of other ways he could have done it much more miraculously. So it's always. The bottom line is, whether we understand it or not, God respects the boundaries He created because those too are divine. Remember, Keich HaGvul is not farther from Etzem than Gvul. Bli Gvul. Bli Gvul is a more logical reflection of Elikus when you see something, unlimited. But Keich HaGvul is not less Elikus, and in some ways it's deeper because it's revealing the deeper plan. Like I said, we never understand why God created logic the way it is. 2 plus 2 is 4. Because He could have created logic that 2 plus 2 is 5. I don't mean the words. And that would have made sense. That's something you could debate forever. Why is the logic that we have logical, and why is not another way logical? But that's already getting into the Ratzonali, that this is the way He chose. He could have chosen another way, He could have. But the fact that He chose this way, that itself reflects something. And then you go into places where it's very hard to really speculate, because He's not bound by it, but yet this is what He chose. So you have to say this choice, that there's 10 spheres and not 12, in some way is a reflection of some type of asmistic reality. He's not bound to numbers. That's the whole chad v'lei b'chushbon, the whole. The bottom line is, just like we respect the God that's beyond everything, we have to respect the God that created everything. Because He created the system, not we did. It's not a man-made system. And that itself is a divine entity. The question then is, how do you bring the two together? Here, the main focus in the beginning of this Hemshech is definitely how the structure that God created, which for us is a very limited structure, can connect to the structure as it's envisioned in Atzmus Mamish. Or he calls us a Spheres Agnuzis Lifnei Atzimtzum, and that already connects to the Bligvul beyond that. That's really what the crux of the whole issue is. How can Gvul, a world that is fundamentally Gvul, as we're speaking, fundamentally, it's not Gvul because someone's concealing the Bligvul and we just, it's like, in other words, the truth is, it's all Bligvul. And the only thing is, we're limited vision. No, it's fundamentally a structure, which of course is the basis of all Torah. Torah is based on structure. We talked about Shiurim. A Shir is not just a Shir, a Torah sanctioned parameters. So it's not just a human thing. And how do you reconcile that with connecting ultimately to God Himself? So the first step in this is to understand that this whole Gvul has a root, goes all the way to like you keep saying, like Reim HaMailas. You go all the way up, you're going to find somewhere, Lifnei Atzimtzum, you're going to be able to find, not find as in a physical sense, but there is somewhere in the God mind the structure of Esespheres, which also explains why in Ayin Beis he goes with the Shitta very strongly that Eres Mitziyarim. You know, there's like with the he brings several times already that Pardes, according to the Pardes of Ramak, Esespheres Agnuzis is this root Sheresh HaKelim, the root of the containers, which would basically say Eir is off limits, so to speak. Eir is divine domain. Eir does not have anything that is structured. Basically, it's God's presence. That's about it. And if you want structure, that's Sheresh HaKelim. God created structure. There, the problem there is you have it's very nice when you speak from the perspective of Eir. So Elokus, so to speak, is intact, godliness. But it's very clear that the Rebbe Rashab is emphasizing that Esespheres Agnuzis is the root of also the Eiris, not just the containers, which means that energy itself in existence that we have in existence, that itself is in the so-called divine side to it. It's not just the creature. And that is a key element here, which of course complicates matters, but at the end of the day, it provides a much more eloquent and more achdus than the other approach. Because it means that we connect actually to the godliness itself, not just as I said several times, like servants, containers, that basically have to surrender to a amorphous and bligvul Eir, that you don't have to surrender. Even the Eir itself relates to Chesed and Gvura and Chochma and binah, Eir Chochma, Eir binah, as he's saying here. So the Eir becomes the mumutza, the interface between the structure and the divine. Essentially, according to this, it gets more complicated because you're basically saying in God's vision, there's also a vision of the structure of existence. Not just that He wants it, but He Himself has that type of structure in His mind or in His being, however you want to interpret it. So it's much harder to understand, much harder. As I said, it's much easier to just explain that Eir remains Bligvul and so on. But that will be discussed also further more at length.
All of this is not in Atzmus.
Well, in Atzmus, B'chal, there's no structures, and there's no non-structures. The expression about Atzmus is Shlilas HaChiyuv v'Shlilas HaShlila, which means if you talk in Atzmus, structure of spheres and no structure is equal. You can't also say it has no structure. You can't say anything. So when we're talking here, we're talking already how Atzmus manifests and we'll call Metzias, in the Metzias Nimtza.
Simon, just one little thing. Du sagst, dass sagt, geringer zu verstehen,
Geringer, nein, the other way. Geringer zu verstehen, nicht Eres Mitziyarim. It's a deeper Achdus. No, I'm saying easier to understand according to the other Mekubalim, because then you don't, it's not touching, you don't go there. It's like Ein Lo Esek Ben Istaris almost. Anyway, what I'm saying, Geringer, it's easier to understand. It makes it easier to make it much easier to understand us as servants and God as a master. And there's a certain disconnect, and that's that. And we don't really connect all the way. But Achdus is much deeper this way.
Der Griechen, wie sein allein, ist Bringer durch Eres mit Zuhören.
I say Achdus is tiefer durch Eretz Mitzrayim.
Das ist tiefer.
Just open the door downstairs here, you go down. Okay, so we begin the next Maimed, Sim B'Mishpat Tipada. It's page Ayin 70. Sim B'Mishpat Tipada V'Shaveh B'Zdakeh. This is the last pasuk in the Haftarah of Shabbos Chazain, which is this Pasha Dvarim here. That Zion, referring to Israel or Yerushalayim, will be redeemed through Mishpat. It's usually titled Din.
Oh, Beis HaMikdash.
Siyam Beis HaMikdash could also be Tipada. There's different interpretations, yeah. Will be redeemed through Mishpat, through justice. V'Shaveh and its captives, B'Zdakeh, through charity, through righteousness. I mean, there's different interpretations. V'tzarech l'hav ma'u emrim tziyim b'mishpat. We have to understand, what does it mean? What does he mean by saying tziyim b'mishpat? Haloi hakavona hui akol Yisrael. Oh, so he's touching tziyim, actually the Jews. Isn't the intention on this? The intention of this is kol Yisrael, the general Jewish people. Lo yal yesh v'tziyim dafke, not just on those that are living there, on the inhabitants of Zion. V'imkei ma'u emrim tziyim dafke. So Tzion definitely refers to Israel. The question is, since he's talking about all of Israel will be redeemed, even those that are not living there, so why is he saying Dafke Tzion b'mishpat tipod? Gamau in v'shaveh b'zdaka, and also what is...
Here, the Tzion means it's a soul.
Yeah. Gamau in v'shaveh b'zdaka, what is v'shaveh b'zdaka? The mashmash zeh in acher b'mash amar kedim. It appears that this is like a second thing. One is Sim B'Mishpat Tipada, the second thing is Shaveh B'Zdaka. So it seems like it appears it's a separate thing. V'tzarech l'hav and mahu. What is the second thing? V'lomet Sim B'Mishpat Tipada v'Shaveh B'Zdaka. And why is it Dafke B'Mishpat and through Zdaka? Well, l'hav in Zeh, as we said, this is an addition that came later, all these additions and ends of the Maimorim, that when it was delivered exactly 100 years ago, when the Rebbe Rashab delivered. But he wrote the Hemshech earlier, and in some places it appears he also even wrote these beginnings and ends earlier, but a different period. So now he goes back to the flow. To understand this, we have to preface by what we discussed earlier. The Spheres, See, here he goes. The Spheres, which is the building blocks of existence, there's a division, there's a diversity of Maila Mata. Literally higher and lower. There's a hierarchy of higher and lower. And what we learn, I'm sorry, and Maila Mata is means in the level of volume, degree, of more or less. That the higher level radiates a higher energy, more revealed energy than in the lower level. That's the definition. And we explained that the primary force that defines these states, these higher and lower states, is their fundamental, their fundamental personality and level. A higher level is fundamentally higher. Compared to the lower level. This is, as I said, the operative example that he's using. The Chochma fundamentally is higher than binah. The binah tefesses like b'chinas hametzias delikus. Binah, comprehension, because it comprehends and it breaks it into details, it grasps only the existence of the divine, of godliness. Chochma tefesses b'chinas hamahus, and Chochma grasps not only the existence of it, but what it is. Like when you see something, now I know what it is. Not necessarily you understand it, but you see the thing itself. And binah understands it, but it's not the essence of it. Just to qualify again, Chochma and binah. Chochma, when he talks about Chochma here, it's easy to just say Chochma binah and memorize the levels, but try to visualize this, and you'll see how complicated it is. How do we look at Chochma? Chochma is an akuda. We think of Chochma. We are told that Chochma is the beginning of the concept. You get an idea flash in your head. That's Chochma. As soon as you begin talking about it, it's binah. As soon as you begin to explain it, it's binah. So what does it mean that Chochma tefes? Exactly where do we have this tefisa? So, as I discussed, the Rebbe, he's on this level, he can enter into Chochma and just stay there and describe to you what it's like there. But it doesn't have, in practicality, can we emulate that? Can we travel to Chochma? As soon as you go there and start talking about it, you're ready in binah. Chochma has a spark that passes in a second. But if you think about it from a mile lamata, like how this emerges, you remember the Rebbe Rashab is not climbing and looking at the world and figuring it out. He's saying this is how God put it. So first Chochma is the first emanation of Elokus. In other words, what I'm trying to say is that we learn in Yeshiva, we learn it in the initial Chassidus, Chochma binah is like, I get a flash of an idea, and then it's elaborated. We relate to binah much more, obviously. But if you think about it from the point of view of God, He didn't need Chochma and binah. Chochma and binah are two ways that He manifests. So it's not just two steps in the process. That's why our process also works that way, that it begins with Chochma and binah. But from above, Chochma is an entity. It's a very ethereal, a very sublime and very subtle entity, but it's an entity. It's outside of Kesed. It's already the beginning, as he called before. It's idea. However, it's the idea that does not break into details and so on. So just to point out, so we speak Chochma, it's not to just memorize words. We're really talking about a divine level that is very, very intense, like a Nakuda, a Kav. And when you speak from Mata L'mayla, it's very hard to talk about Chochma. When you speak from Mayla L'mata, meaning from above down, Chochma is the place where you could say the divine image, the divine desire begins to the first gili and revelation of it is in a concentrated form. Think of it like the seed. Okay, look at the seed. A seed in the ground, or a seed that's conceived of a baby, of a child, we can't relate to a seed. I mean, we know it's there, but it's not a full blown. You can't communicate it with it. You can't call it yet an entity as we relate to it. Everything there is concentrated. So from a perspective of science, that's where they stop, the seed. They have no idea of that. But if you think from above, that God put the seed there, that He put all of life into a little seed. And that seed will become a full-blown adult. So we relate to people, we relate to binah. We don't relate to Chochma. But when you understand Chochma, and you really dissect it, you're really going into how does it look like from the seed point of view. That's how, if you really think about it, how complicated it really is. Because we don't relate to a seed. This is literally a gili that the Rebbe Rashab did not tell us. And Kabbalah and Chassidus didn't tell us what Chochma looked like. There's no way we could go there. Because we don't relate to that level of concentration. But that's the way things work. And everyone knows this. A tree that you see was once a seed. And when I say a seed, there was a point that it was a seed that you couldn't even recognize. It was microscopic. You wouldn't even know. If you didn't know that, and observe that it grows in the tree, you'd never believe that a tree could have once been inside that seed. So Chochma is that type of intensity. It's a completely different state of being. So a seed and a tree are not just Gilead Helam. I mean, there's a certain Gilead Helam in it, obviously, like you said before, that at the end of the day, binah does emerge from Chochma. But not because Chochma naturally suddenly becomes binah. It's two different forces. One brings the other. But it's in a way, it's almost like, he said, Chochma binah, if you remember, he said it's also a form of ilav ol, of a different mahus. But in this case, it's even bigger ilav because it says that Chochma is higher than even the first level of ilav ol, which means even higher than the ilav ol, cause and effect, where the cause and effect are of a different personality. I'm just trying to point out that it shouldn't just take for granted when you say Chochma, okay, I got it. Okay, Chochma and binah. If you really personalize it, you realize it's not so simple. Chochma, to understand Chochma is very complicated in this context. So I'm just trying to make sure that we don't just mechanically say, okay, Chochma is Mohus, binah is Metzias, let's move on. To understand it, you can spend a whole lifetime, maybe if we daven properly, you think about it during davening, it would be a little easier to integrate. But I just wanted to point that out. Right. And I'm saying, but when you learn it, and you learn it like Shulchan Aruch, you could say, okay, I got that. There's 2 madregas, and now I record it. So I have 2 shelves. Chochma is here, binah is here. But if you start thinking about it in a more real way, 1 second here. Well, exactly, how does the Chochma work exactly? And when you start getting it that way, then you can start talking about Atzmus. Even Chochma we can't figure out. Forget about Kesser. And when you start going to Kesser, Kesser is unconscious. Can you talk about the unconscious? See what I'm saying? We're talking Chochma is already conscious wisdom. And it's still quite hard to relate to. I'm not saying this to dismiss. I'm saying, if I can, this forces us. In other words, there's no way to climb the ladder back to Elokus just with mathematical numbers. It's not about going from finite to infinite. You have to train yourself to think more abstractly. As long as you're trapped in a binah, in other words, if you want, like people in this world, they want to control things. They want to own things. I want to own love. I want to own the truth. I want to own God. As soon as you want to own it, it's over with. You'll never get it. It's like habareich min hakovid. Anyone runs after, pursues honor, the honor will elude you. If you run the other way, and like the Rebbe says, not looking over your shoulder if it's chasing you, then you get it. When the beautiful, I want to point it out. I've said it a few times. The Rebbe brings it in the Sikha Purim time. Shabbos, I think, after Purim Memches. So I thought it was a chiddush from the Rebbe, but it's actually Purim Yofis from the Baal HaFlo, who's a Talmud of the Baal Shem Tov. The Rebbe asked the question, when Moshe Rabbeinu asked the Eibishter, Hareini no chvedecha, show me your face, your chvedecha, your glory. The Eibishter says, Lo yireini adam v'chay, no person can see me and live. Then he continues and says, the Eibishter says, V'isa sacherai upana lo yiro. And he showed him, it says, whatever, the film, the kasha shall film, the different midrashim, Rashi. Yeah. So the Rebbe asked a few questions. First of all, why does the Eibishter have to rub it in? He already told him that you can't see me and live. So he has to say, upon lo yiro. Say, okay. He says, he said it already. Then, why did Moshe was not smart enough to understand? We could all understand you can't see Atzmos in the face. Moshe didn't understand. He's asking to see it. And then the tzaddik asks for something, and the Eibishter does not fulfill it. Why doesn't he fulfill it? And above all, why tell us? If Moshe asked something, and the Eibishter didn't fulfill it, why do we need to know? You need to know everything that Moshe asked, and God said no. So clearly all this is, the Rebbe answers, and Panim Yafa says it specifically. The whole thing is how you read, so we read, Reisa Sachere, comma, you see the back, the face you won't see. You're supposed to read it, you'll see my back and my face. But my face, comma, you'll see through lo yiro, by not looking. Which is tremendous. Vort, taich. Yeah, exactly. But it's even deeper than Yidiyas Hashlil ultimately. But the point is that, so it answers all the questions. Moshe asked because he knew that you can get there. Because he knew that Achdus Hashem means you can even get to the things that you can get to, so to speak. Right.
You want to know a technique?
No, not necessarily. Maybe he wanted to know technique, or he wanted God to do something. And you know, bottom line is that there are things that it says, Ili Idaitiv Heyisiv. If I would know it, I would be. If I knew God, I would be God. And then the Rebbe brings that the Rebbe Rashab, when he was learning the Kutei Torah, he actually reached that level of Yidaitiv Heyisiv.
He's heard it. The Rebbe Rashab said.
Yeah.
Yidaitiv Heyisiv.
So how do you reconcile the two? The answer is because if you get to the level of bittul, where you're no longer you could be one with it. Now, the whole challenge, of course, here is that the Akhdah should be such that we remain a Metzius. That's where it gets, how do we do that? The answer, bottom line, is that you can no way that you can connect it to Atzmos on Atzmos terms as long as you remain structured in your terms. Once you come to realize that you can, like that's what I said here, when you take this exercise and try to understand Chochma, it forces you can't think of Gashmis quite the same way again. We said earlier that when someone is Mizbein in Elikus, someone who meditates, contemplates on divine, Gashmis has less of a hold on them. Why? You could say you could meditate on it, and then you go back to your grubkai, to your crassness. The answer is because if you really meditated on it and you really appreciated it, you'll realize reality is not this world. It's a higher reality. And since it's a higher reality, that's the real reality, the world becomes less hold on you. The fact that you can go back to where you are is because the world is much stronger than you think it is. Don't convince yourself just because you can meditate about something that's outside of you that you're really there. That's the pain point. But the fact is, Chassidus makes it very clear that the more you do it, the more it becomes part of you, and it has to release some of the hold of Elam Haz in a person. Which of course is why learning alone is not enough. You have to daven, you have to ma'aseh mitzvahs. But the point is that Chassidus is meant to aid a person. That's the bottom line. And when you learn this properly, that's what I'm saying. That's why I thought it was injustice the way we were taught these inyanim. You learn it like, okay, Chochma, so you're a smart guy. Okay, Chochma is a little more abstract than binah, and that's it. It's not like forcing you to really. 1 second, start thinking about Chochma. How could I even talk about Chochma? Chochma is like the fiyerech, like lo yireini adam. You can't see Chochma. As soon as you see it, it's binah already. So how do we talk about it? The answer is you could, because there's a part of you, if you're ready to give up your so-called need for control and understand and grasping everything of binah, there's a point where you can sense it, but you have to become a little less of yourself. There's no way that you're going to sense it if you're a yesh, basically. Now, the more you do it, obviously, the more refined the person gets. And this is also, and as I said, this is the fiyerach. This is not. We're not even talking here kesser of atzilus. You start going to kesser, you're talking about the unconscious. It's a whole other level. I just wanted to point out everything when this comes into word. One of the reasons Kabbalah was never communicated. Why ain't desh ma'aseh makov ela biyachid? Why can't you learn these things only one-on-one? What's wrong with learning it in a group? I mean, what? Because so usually people say because there's secrets, to keep it secret, but that's not the reason. Because words are not adequate. The whole idea yachid means it's a yachid type of experience. If you're going to try to put it into words and let's have a course on it, you're defeating the whole purpose. Real Kabbalah, real Chassidus is sublime and it's really beyond words. The fact that the Alter Rebbe was malbish in Chabad and in words was a sakana actually. It was a big challenge. In heaven they really wondered whether you could allow to do this. Why were they afraid? You can't articulate Torah in words? What's wrong with communicating Torah? That was not the problem, the communication. The problem was that it would be lost. That's why the Alter Rebbe's mashal is so critical, where he says that when the child is sick, and you take the Evan Teva, the most precious stone, and you crush it. Why do you have to go to such extreme? You're taking the most precious stone of God, you have to crush it, mix it with water, and maybe it'll get through his clenched teeth. Maybe. And even if most of it drops on the floor, it's still worth it. Because it's not just an Evan Teva, nice, precious stone. You're talking about something that's beyond words. To put it in words defeats the purpose. It's so easy to get trapped in the words of it. So when the Arizal and all these, we put it into words, the Arizal often in Eitz Chaim will say, really you can't express it. El l'shachach za'ezen, because it has to have something that the ear should be able to hear. We say it. I remember the Rebbe saying it once about Yud Aleph Nissen. Actually, he said, when you say Yud Aleph, it's l'mayel miseder shtalshus. Yud is the structure. Yud Aleph is higher. So why do we call it Yud Aleph? So the Rebbe said the truth is it's not Yud Aleph. It's beyond. But for people like us, the only way to say it is say Yud Aleph, because it's outside of 10. So there are levels that are, the only way you can appreciate them is by that type of processing. And I'm just stating this because throughout learning Chassidus is a critical point. You have to constantly stop yourself. When you get it too much, you're probably in trouble. Let's put it this way. And I don't mean that you should not get it and that you should get confused. I'm saying if you're getting it too much in your terms, you're probably on a lower level. To get it, you have to have the lo yiro. It's almost like stepping back. Okay, how does Chochma exactly work? 1 second. And I'm trying to understand it now. It's not so simple. As I said, because you're going into a place. That's why, for example, theoretical physics, or the people who discuss theories of, let's say, how that seed works. When a child is conceived, an egg is fertilized by a seed. And now there's a new beginning life. It's impossible to relate to. Can someone explain what happens at that moment? Nobody can explain it. Nobody can replicate it. With all technology, they cannot replicate it. They can take at that moment and maybe continue making it grow outside of a womb. Fine. But to replicate that moment, what happens? Is it electricity? What is it? I'm just trying to point out. So when you're there, there's a certain sense of awe that you realize there's something completely... And those scientists that actually have that awe, they begin to relate to. Those that try to think to understand it on the terms of so-called, okay, let's figure out what machine will work, will never get it. That's why Einstein, maybe because that's why he was Jewish, that's why he was, as a Jew, Einstein and some of these physicists, it doesn't have to be Jewish for this, what they had to do is, Einstein's made it clear, they had to think completely out of the box. They could not think with mechanics. Because if you think with mechanics and the rules, you're never going to get there. Yeah. You have to imagine. It's imagination that's necessary. I once met a scientist. I knew him very well. He used to come to my classes. He said to me, the big difference, he says, ultimately, and I learned Chassidus and my sciences, I don't have imagination. That's what he said to me. He says, this you need imagination for. I know mechanics well. Imagination, now some scientists have a lot of imagination, and they're called a little crazy as well. But they're the ones that think of crazy ideas that you would never think of. Like a solution that you would be completely not the one you would expect. So, look, the Rebbe in Tafshin Yud was after World War II, right? 5 years after World War II. Everybody was refugees. Chabad for sure. Of course there were American Jews, but they were not. They were the ones that needed help. The Chassidim were all refugees. So what do you think the Rebbe would do? You'd think, let everybody settle in, learn English, or whatever language, build businesses, make money, and then start building majlis, organizations. And in 30, 40 years, when everybody has settled in, we'll start spreading Yiddishkeit. No. Within a few years, whatever it is, I want you to leave here, go find your way. Sent a bunch of young people, didn't know what they were doing. They didn't know administration and business administration and finance, and if they did, they wouldn't have gone. They knew nothing. Some didn't know language. Right away. It's counterintuitive. But that's a leader. A leader doesn't think by the rules. He thinks sees the bigger picture. Think about it. Think, that would be your plan? The first thing you think is let people learn a little language. Let them learn how to a little parnasa. It didn't give any peace. I'm just pointing out that any big solutions always come from something that's completely counterintuitive, because it's coming from a person who's not thinking through the system. You're thinking from the bigger picture. The Rebbe Rashab establishing the yeshiva. How was he able to see? Forget about Ruach HaKodesh and all this. It's probably because of that also. But he foresaw what was going to come. He's clear. You see the sikh of Yikel Yetzel Mechamas Beis David. How did 1901, 1900, that sikh, Tafshe Samachalef, Simchas Torah, so 1900. These things are amazing. And I'm not speaking now about a miracle. Miracle, fine. But it's more than that. He did some things, B'derech HaTeva, he set up a yeshiva, and so on and so forth. They prepared. My point is, I'm just using small examples here. Talking Yud Gimel Tammuz may be connected. So the point is that to really appreciate these levels, you have to be able to constantly stop yourself and say, 1 second, let me figure this out before we go on. So the truth is, to learn Ayin Beis, the way we're learning it at this speed, is in a way counter what I'm saying. But maybe this qualification, then we can be made ahead and continue on. Because this alone you could talk about your whole lifetime, about the difference between Chochma and binah. And I have no doubt, if you understand Chochma and binah better, it's much easier then to go to Kesed, and much easier then to understand Esesphiras Agnuzis. But if you don't go through the lower steps of abstraction, how can you get to the higher ones? There's no way. And if you're a teacher, if you don't teach a child to get away, the student, to get away from the tangible relationship to a table, to understand something that's a little less tangible, you're definitely not going to jump 10 levels. So it is a level by level thing, and that guf is part of the kavanah, because the Eibishter wanted it to be integrated in the system, back to integrated energy. So with that Hartzik Verter, we'll move on. Yeah? Mem Aleph. Omnam Adayin Tzarich Lahavin, as if we understand everything till now. Okay, fine. So officially we do understand everything till now. So now the Rebbe Rashab is saying, however, we still have to understand. Isn't Chochma, after all, a form of yediyah sichlis. It's a cognitive knowledge. Akoponim, he's saying, in the lower levels of Chochma, even if you say, okay, the higher levels are beyond yediyah, but the lower level, what I just said, like the spark of an idea, the point of an idea, concept. In general, this is the level of Yesed Abba, as we learned earlier. That's how, in Abba itself, in Chochma, remember, you need also a diminishment before it goes into binah. That's called Yesed Abba, which is the lowest level, one level below, before Malchus of Abba. So that's how low it is. So even in the Kudus HaSkola I was talking about, which also is almost hard to talk about, is also the lowest levels of Chochma. So upon those levels, how does a Yediyah Sichlis? That's a Yediyah Sichlis. Fine, it's a Nakuda, it's only a concentrated point, but you can't call it Amunah, you can't call it Ratzon, desire, it's Seichel. And this concept can be developed, when you have an idea, that idea can be developed into a major company. It can be developed into a major force and a major entity. So we're not talking about, so it's a component, it's the idea of Seichel Goli. And it's called a Goli because it's revealed. It's not in the unconscious any longer. V'kol ha'asaga de binah, and even more so, he's going even further. And the whole comprehension of binah is what? He benekudas ha'askola, the Chochma. Binah is comprehending Chochma. Binah is not creating a new idea. The idea was conceived of. Binah now is developing that idea. So that it makes it even stronger that we're talking here Seichel Goli. So if that's the case, also the point of the concept is also a Seichel and a intelligence, Vasaga, and some form of comprehension. I don't know if the word comprehension would not be the right word. Some form of Seichel Asaga, some form of intelligence. Loi b'bchinas asaga mamish, he's qualifying in the parentheses, not mamish asaga, like binah, in other words, it's not comprehension. Aval hu sichli, sheshaychli in asaga, it's sichli now. It's something that is intelligent, that is capable of being comprehended. That's a very key way of looking at it. In other words, it's something you could understand, even though at that state it's not understood yet. Loi hayediyah deriyah, not that awareness that comes from just seeing. In other words, basically he's saying that Riyah is the higher levels of Chochma, before Nekudas HaSkola. That's what he's just qualified here. Because he said before, Riyah, seeing something, is Chochma.
Using a saga to look at Chochma, though?
He says not a saga mamish. In other words, not comprehension, but it's something that is capable of being comprehended. When you have a spark of an idea, at that state it's not yet called a full comprehension. But you're capable, Binah is going to understand the Chochma.
That's right, we're still using Binah.
Right, yeah, but it's Chochma now. But Chochma means, so you have to say Chochma has potential being understood. In other words, when you say, for example, you can't see me and live, it's not Chochma that way. Chochma you could see and live, but at that state it's a seed. Think of the stage before it's a seed, that would be beyond Chochma. Once it's a seed, it's true, you can't relate to the seed yet, but the seed will develop, it will sprout. In the case of Seichel, it will become something you can flesh out. What?
Why do you have to say that the Madrigas Atachpenis are having the Nekudas HaSkola?
What's your other option, that it's not?
Yediyah Deriyah, the whole Chochma. And the Binah is dwelling in that.
Breaking the Chochma into two parts.
Well, let's talk. One second. Excuse me. One second. Let's not talk ruchnis. Let's talk Gashmis. Every development plan begins with a point of concept. What do you mean? I mean, everything begins. You get an idea. So good. A million ideas don't go anywhere, but one idea takes hold, and someone develops it. Someone had an idea to create Google. At the moment there was an idea, the idea could have disappeared. To organize all the information in the world. And then idea. That's the reason. There's a point in Chochma that's even before the concept where, I'll put it this way. You're walking down the street, you look at something, And it doesn't yet give you an idea, if you're able to break it down. But that thing you saw was ultimately the reason that gave you the idea. You have a lot of times in science, when you find the idea that came to them, they say Newton's famous one. I don't know if it's true or not. The apple fell on his head. He was like lying under an apple tree, and an apple fell on him. So he had an experience. Now, apple falls on a lot of people. But that became the experience, that's the concept of gravity. So we can see something, at that stage it's not even a category of a concept. But later, if you retrace the steps, you say, because I saw that, it touched me. That thing ultimately gave me an idea. That idea was fleshed out. So basically, Chochma definitely has a stage where it's becoming the beginnings of a seed of something that will develop into binah. And there is not that type of jump. Well, let's see what he's going to say. So he's asking the question now. Basically, the question on the table here is like this. We're saying that Chochma and binah be'etzem muhus, some separate madreges, and Chochma is etzem is riyas amuhus, hasagas amuhus, understanding the essence of something. And Chochma and binah is the comprehension of Metzias. When in fact, he's saying Chochma is, Chochma is also part of Seichel. Look, it's a question, there's going to be an answer. It's not, again, we're talking back and forth here. Because this was Madregas Achtachtenes. And even though the lower levels of Chochma are higher than comprehension and intelligence, there it's a form of seeing and resonating truth. It's not even a category of an akuda yet. It's not yet even the spark of an idea. As I said before in the other class, I think it would be a great exercise. You want to relate to this? You have to identify today or any day some nekudas of Chochma that fall into your head, and try to figure out, see how far back you can go and trace it. Where did it come from? And you begin to probably relate a little bit. See, we already focus on where we are, but think for a moment. You get an idea today, and so whatever idea it may be, hopefully in Kedusha, try to trace when did that idea fall into your head, and why did it fall into your head? Where did it come from? As I said, sometimes it comes from your conversation, gives you an idea. You see something, it usually happens very randomly. According from our perspective, it doesn't you don't sit down and say, okay, let me think of an idea. It usually happens. If something's bothering you, or something, you have a challenge or a problem, you're walking this. So why I'm saying it is because then you can begin to trace. There's the Riyah stage, where you had before even the flash of the idea, some type of moment of truth. That then became an idea, which then becomes fleshed out. So it'd be a good exercise to trace that. I assume you all have ideas from time to time, right?
The Riyah stage is the highest stage?
Yeah, the Riyah is the higher stages, clearly. I'm trying to think myself. I had a lot of ideas today, but the problem is you get so involved right away in the next step, you don't even think about where they came from. It's hard to do that. Pretty hard process. It's a good exercise in Bittul, that's for sure.
I think one of the Rebbe's Pamor, maybe somebody is saying that there is a stage which is higher than the Riyah.
Could be. Look, listen, my friend, there's a lot of stages higher than Riyah. But let's try to get to Riyah. You see, also this Riyah is not the Riyah that comes at the end of Asaga. There's sometimes you struggle with something and you finally master it, and you see it you get a sense. It's not what he's talking about here. He's not talking about what comes at the end. He's talking about what comes at the beginning. It's a different Riyah here. Here it's almost like that initial clarity. You have to also be involved in using your mind, obviously. This is intellectual activity here. Most of us are Bali Midas. We're busy with our feelings about things. Whether it's good for me or it's not good for me. This requires also stepping back and thinking about the thing itself, not just what it means for you. Okay.
Does Chochma always precede binah?
In the process of cognitive, absolutely. In the Shadish, obviously binah has a root in its source, maybe, but in the process, how could you have a comprehension without a concept?
Maybe you're getting a shear, let's say, and you're going through binah, and then at the end of the shear,
That's what you just said a minute ago.
That's a student is learning what a teacher is teaching or a text. So yeah, but that's different. That's not because you have binah before Chochma. That's because you're learning an idea that's already there. No, it's interesting. He's asking from a point of view of Makabel, how does it work? When you're in recipient mode.
Even when
No.
there is a point of Chochma.
But no, the truth is that Makabel is not supposed to be in a mode of Chochma or binah. It's supposed to be in a mode of listening. You're not processing really. You're listening to someone else's Chochma and binah. That's really what you're doing. So yeah, right. So really, when you talk about a Talmud, you're not really in binah yet, because it's not your binah. You're reading something that's being told to you, and you receiving it. It's like being trained, and then comes your Chochma and binah. That's how I would understand it.
there's no binah in the point of Chochma.
No, what you're saying is if someone's reading the explanation of an idea, is that binah before Chochma? No, that's not your binah. You're reading someone else's binah. So it's not, so for it to be yours, it has to be some Chochma and binah there. So it has to be something. But definitely Chochma and binah is definitely in the context of our own processing of something, not relearning something else. You know, because let me think for a moment. Yeah, well, so let's put it this way: if you had a good teacher, they would never teach you binah before Chochma. Maybe that's a good way to put it. If you had a good teacher and they start teaching you something, they're going to give you hagdamas. They'll give you an introduction. They'll say, "Going to learn a piece of Gemara now. Let's do an introduction." They'll give you their Chochma first, and then they'll say, "Now there's the details." And truth is, a student that's only getting binah without the Chochma will be at some point will get lost, because like you don't have what's the assumptions here? What's the musculation? What's the point of departure?
He's a bad teacher, he's a good student.
Yeah, but if it's a good student and a bad teacher, so he needs another teacher. Huh? If he's a good student and a bad teacher, he'll find another teacher. If he's a bad student and a bad teacher, he'll stay with him.
You have an idea, you write it down, and then at the end you start writing it.
Right. No, you ask a practical question of how the process works. The process of Chochma Binah for sure works when you're walking down the street, or you're in the shower, or wherever ideas come from. Some people tell me ideas come from shower head, because that's where the ideas always come from. So I say, why don't we test it? Shut off the shower and see if the ideas stop flowing. You know? Probably will. Okay, but the point I'm saying is, the general process is ideas are coming to you. A student is a different discussion. A student is listening to a process of intelligence that already has been put in place. So obviously you can begin technically from the binah, you're reading something, and you can get back to where this idea began from. Of course you could technically go there.
A student cannot get it, even when you hear that from a teacher. It goes in his mind, the process of Chochma and binah.
But where's the concept? Because the student doesn't yet have a flash of an idea. He's reading a bunch of pages. He doesn't even have a clue necessarily where the idea began from. That's what he's saying. Let's say you're reading. You just open up a thing, you start reading.
So in your mind, there is the process of Chochma. Otherwise, you won't understand it.
Okay, depends how you interpret Chochma.
I would just looking for a creator. Yeah, so he sees this, and then he chops it on his own, right?
No, but I would not start with that's a different. The Chochma there is that he began a search. His spark is there must be something out there. That would be Chochma, not what he discovered. It would be that there must be something, Balabayas Lebirazu, whatever. He came to that awareness. One morning he woke up, it can't be Avodah Zarah, there must be something. That's Chochma. Then he began the search. And then what he finds is Das or whatever. No, listen, the word clarity or flash is not synonymous with Chochma. You could have the clarity, as I said, at the end of the process. Chochma is the beginning of the process always. I would say there's always Chochma. I'm not sure exactly the time. I mean, the way I just explained it would be, I think, fine. Okay, then he says like this. That the higher levels are nevertheless, the lower levels of Chochma that become the source for binah, that is in the category of intelligence. How then do we say that Chochma, its fundamental essence and level, is higher? After recognizing, considering that Chochma is also an intelligent type of process, intelligent experience. And anything that is seichel and hasag, anything that is comprehensible, it has to be metzius, based on the argument he made before. That binah has to grasp it, that has to be comprehensible. So even though Chochma is only an ikuda at this point, only the beginning, but since it's seichel, it's also metzius. So how could you say that it's muhus? It goes even deeper. It says even so. How do you synonymize? How do you make it synonymous? How do you compare? I'm sorry. If that's the case, therefore the Chochma is synonymous with and comparable to binah be'etzem muhusa in their fundamental nature. And is distinguished from binah only in the measure of energy, but not a qualitative different jump. In other words, we spoke earlier that that one level from the next is fundamentally different, not just in ribu mir ta'er, in the measure of energy, but they're fundamentally different, and that's why, if you remember, that's why they have either more or less energy. They spoke earlier in which chapter? Yeah, in chapter Lamed Zayin. Yeah, Lamed Zayin. And now we're saying that since Chochma, at least the lower levels, have a commonality with binah, so the difference is only in Mirta Ribu Yair. It's not fundamentally a different level. It's a frot seichel, just it's not yet developed like binah. Now obviously he's setting up, he's going to find an answer here. But you see here, just from the question, Shalas Chacham Chetzi Tshuva, the question of a wise person is have the answer, you see from the question how he's struggling to find the interface, the whole discussion about the place where they meet. Is Chochma touching something beyond, or is Chochma part of binah and the structure of Ishtalshalos? That's the key question here. I mean, he's explaining it in words, but the quick question, where do these two meet? Can they meet? And of course this is going to address also, how can you say that the higher levels of Chochma is Riyah, which is a different quality, and the lower levels of Chochma belong to binah, so to speak, more common to binah? How does that work? So clearly Chochma is setting up that Chochma is going to be a combination of opposites. Question is, or the explanation is, this is a very fundamental piece here, because this is like, you get this one, it can help tremendously understand other paradoxes. So everyone understands the question very loud and clear? Just to sum it up very clear, there's a contradiction here that he's pointing out. He says Meichen Abba is Ma'alim Ishtalshalos, that the intelligence of Chochma is higher than Ishtalshalos, and he explained at length why. Ishtalshalos is subject to gradations, to levels, Ila va'olol, Meichen Amidis, Chochma Bina, or in Seichel itself, the different types of cause and effect. Meichen Ab is Atzmi, he called it. Riyah, you see. There's no levels there. It's higher than Ishtalshalos. And therefore that demonstrates that Milo Mata, higher and lower, in the structure of the spheres, are fundamental. That which is higher is fundamentally, qualitatively different than the next level. Not just quantitatively different, not just relative one to the next. But now, when you really analyze Chochma, the lower levels of Chochma, he says, are not subject to this description. The higher, yeah, but the lower levels are maybe just a point, but they're in the world of comprehension. They're in the world of, they will be comprehended. Now we can speculate the answer, but the bottom line is, he's saying the lower levels of Chochma are, so to speak, the beginnings of binah. And the distinction is binah is less energy, Chochma is more energy. It's more concentrated. But let's put it this way, like he spoke about Yesem Eisha Ein Arech, that more than the distance between Asiya and Atzilus is distant from Ein Seif, the distance between a tree and a seed is not as distant as a seed before it became a seed. Because here it's at least a seed. And it's understandable. The seed needs some time, some watering, and it will become a tree. So Chochma, if it's a seed of an idea, it is ultimately just inevitable, or it's going to lead to binah. Or even if it doesn't lead to binah, when it comes from Chochma, is understanding the Chochma. That's the lower levels of Chochma. So the question is, how can we say that Chochma is be'etzem muhus or higher? It's fundamentally a different level, and also that it's muhus. Based on this, the seed is just a mitzias as well. It's just a more sublime state. Once Chochma is hasaga, if Chochma is fundamentally understanding something, except the first stage, then it only can relate to the mitzias of something. If you remember, he said, binah is tefeses. It grasps the vav ktsavis. So only if Chochma is an atzmi can you say. So if it was only riyah, only seeing, then Chochma could be understood fine in this context. But once you apply to Chochma the elements of understanding, even the beginnings, you already now brought it down to a level that it makes it into the world of that the Chochma gets that God exists, the mitzias of the spirit, not the muhus of it. That's the question. And I see the way he's beginning to answer that this is fundamental, because when he says "V'hini al pi poshet yashleimer," is a good sign. That means there's a poshet explanation and there's a not so poshet explanation. So "Hini al pi poshet yashleimer," ostensibly or pashta simply, you can explain yashleimer. We can say "Shezau b'chinas mita'er b'chinas chochma gufa." You could say that when binah comes from chochma, it's a diminishing of the energy from Chochma itself. The haribadeshi is savas abinah ma Chochma tzarich lis mit'er b'Chochma. Comprehension is bar leil perek lamed ches. So Pashtus you could say, well, he didn't fully develop yet, but Pashtus you could say that this mir ta'er is not that binah and Chochma are similar. That in binah in Chochma itself, there's a diminished dimension of energy in order for it to enter into binah. In order for there to come into being binah from Chochma, the comprehension from the idea, from the concept, you need to have a diminishing of the energy in Chochma. Like he gave the example before with the teacher. The diminishing, it's not like the teacher is ready to say and says everything to the student. The teacher in his own mind has to first diminish the flow. So when he opens his mouth, he's going to only say a few words. In other words, the teacher, sometimes you have, for example, teachers who don't prepare. So they didn't prepare in their mind what to say. So they start saying exactly as they understand it. So the student can't fully understand it. So the teacher in his own mind has to first create a diminishing. That's what he said earlier. Perek Lamed Ches. That the tzimtzum has to be first. Yeah, because so you could say that the mir ta'er is not that binah is just diminished chochma. The diminishing of the ayr is in chochma itself, which would not fully answer the question anyway, but at least it's a little help here.
He's not accepting it.
Of course, but v'hainu masha madrega tachtein the chochma b'chinas yidiyah sichel zeh b'chinas mir ta'er. No, so the lower levels of Chochma, which are in the category of already of some type of intelligence, that is a diminished energy. The higher levels are higher than comprehension. And the lower levels are a form of understand, of some intelligence. And that's the source for the comprehension of binah. So what is this coming to tell us? This Pashat is, which is of course is going to reject, but nevertheless, let's just see what the Havamin here is. That what? So before we were learning the opposite. We were learning Chochma, the higher levels. Okay, that's a different domain. The lower levels are the beginnings of binah. So the question is a very legitimate one. How could you say that part of Chochma is a completely different mahus? She's saying, no, maybe we could look at the other way around. The lower levels of Chochma are not the beginnings of binah, they're just the end of the riyah, so to speak. You see something, there you have ribu ha'ir. Then in the mind of the teacher itself, he has to diminish that. Chochma has to diminish. So in order for binah to be able to emerge. So you could argue, therefore, that Chochma is still really in the domain of riyah, different mahus, and just but then later it diminishes within itself in order to come to binah. Obviously, the lower levels of Chochma, right. But in other words, it's not the other way. He's he's dissecting it into detail. But he's going to reject this. In truth, he can't say this. That's because that's the problem. To go from Riyah, from the state of Muhus, to comprehension, even this, is not miyut levad. That's not just a diminishing. Ki'im shinui be'etzem ha'muhus. So the shinui then, basically you're just carrying over the question. Where does it come? Where does some muhus move into mitzias? If you see something and you have that essential connection, that's a beyond level, and that's Chochma, so then we understand Chochma is beyond binah. But if Chochma has in it some hasaga, so even if you say that happened in Chochma itself, but then there you have a shinui. It's not just a miyut. The shinui, it's muhus, is happening within Chochma. How do you hear? The riyah v'hasaga, how do you mecholokim be'etzem musam? Seeing, which means essentially connecting to the essence of something, and understanding are fundamentally apart, fundamentally different. V'im neymar, and if you say the madregas hatachten shebachachma b'chinas seichel v'hasaga, that the lower levels of chachma are in a form of intelligence, has a shinui mahus l'gab madregas al yenu shebachachma. That's a complete shinui, as a complete change of identity or personality from the higher levels. She'en l'mayla me'inyan seichel v'hasaga, because they are higher than comprehension. V'zeh iyav shalemer shemadrega achas yeshinui mahus madregas hapratim sheba. That's a rule. That's an interesting rule, which we have to understand, but let's read it first, because that's you cannot say. Impossible to say, E.F. Shalemer, that on one level you can have such a shinui mahus, in the specific madregas hapratim sheba, that on one level, in its details, it can make such a move from something that is mahus to mitzias. You can't say that. Why can't you say it? That's the question.
Because then the mitzias is not Chochma.
No, I'm saying, I'm just, he's going to explain.
Why is it too different? Why is it too different?
Well, that he explained earlier. It's very clear why it's very different. I'll explain to him. Let me just read this and we'll get to, I'm going to go back. You can't say such a thing. V'inyan hamiyut rak ma she'er mismayet v'ein meir begili aval hu b'esem mahus. How do you read this? V'inyan hamiyut rak ma she'er mismayet v'ein meir begili aval hu b'esem mahus. Is this part of the E.F. Shalemer, or this is part of already the next line?
Yeah.
There's an E.F. Shalemer that on one level you should have such a thing, such a shinui mahus v'inyan hamiyut rak ma she'er mismayet v'ein meir begili aval hu b'esem mahus. No, it's not. Right, he's saying, you cannot say that diminishing should change its mahus. Diminishing can only do one thing. In the same mahus, in the same entity, you can make less and more. But it can't suddenly change the personality. That's what he's saying here. That you could say. You could say, in this level itself, the energy diminishes from level to level in its specific levels as it goes down. But you can't say that it suddenly will shift its personality.
But the Riyah itself causes it to go from wave to particle. I mean, it changes the whole mood.
1 second, we have to. 1 minute. Let's read it, and then we'll understand it. Then we'll try to explain it. And you have to read it. I can't stop jumping. The Rebbe Rashab is explaining himself. Hainu. Okay, but the statement has been made that you cannot say, you cannot answer, in other words, what he tried to say about Piposhet. That what's happened here is that the diminishing is not happening in binah, it's happening within Chochma. And therefore Chochma is still fundamentally that higher level, because then you have a problem, how in Chochma, one mohus, how could it shift from another just by diminishing the energy? That's the problem. You can't say that on one level. Just to answer your question, he explained it earlier in the previous chapter, but I'll elaborate. Riyah and Shmiya are not miyut, one to the other, right? When you hear something, or you see something, it's clearly two different worlds. And just to make the point, if you see a painting, there's no way that you can capture as good as Keich Hasbara you have explanation, you can explain to someone who has not seen it. The Rambam uses the example, let's talk about a blind person. Can you ever explain to a blind person who's never seen colors what colors are? You can explain what they're like. You could say there's two different entities. This one is a little darker, this one's a little lighter. Even that, how do you explain dark and light to someone who's blind? But let's say you have a great Keich Hasbara, you can figure it out. Now, whatever you say is going to be Metzias, not Mohus. That's an example of Riyah. So these are not. So suddenly, how could suddenly, let's say a blind person, is there a point where suddenly seeing can become diminished and then suddenly change into the other level? That's what he's saying. You can't change a Mohus thing. What you can do is, if you can only see, you can't look at the sun because it's very bright. So you put on sunglasses, you diminish the light, you could see it. That you could say. But it's the same light. But there should be a fundamental change in the thing itself just by diminishing the energy. It won't change its personality. So if Chochma is fundamentally Riyah, the question really is, how does it even become Asaga? That's really the question. But bottom line is, you can't just say it's a diminishing and it still really remains Riyah. The real question, of course, is what is this Asaga of Chochma? Is it closer to binah? Is it closer to Riyah? And which Mohus is it? That's what's going on here. Obviously, he's going to explain how there's a level of Asaga that's Mohus, that even in Seichel you could have. That's my assumption is where he's leading to. But that's the question on the table here. From the answer, let's listen, this is not over yet. From the answer, we'll definitely understand the question better. We'll go over it again. Let's learn it. That's how I would go here. V'hainu, which means the levad is the mashmoyes inyanhu. Besides the fact, in addition, or besides the fact that mashmoyes inyan, that what's apparent from this concept, that chochma b'chols madrigos gam madrigos atren shebo yibchinas ma'ila be'etzem madrigos l'gab binah. So besides the fact that what's apparent from this whole discussion is that chochma, even in its lower levels, it's fundamentally higher ma'ila be'etzem than binah, higher than binah and comprehension. Hine gam ze ef shalemer sheyish shinui amahuz b'chinas chochma gufa. Aha. You know what he's doing now? He's adding something. He's saying, first of all, from the whole discussion, even if you say there's a miyut ha'er and chochma, whatever it is, bottom line is, the whole discussion is clearly that chochma is fundamentally different than binah. In all its details, even asag. That's one thing. He's saying here, even if the alpi poshet, even if you can figure it out, the bottom line, we still have a problem. How is chochma fundamentally different? He's saying that what I'm adding here now, in this piece that we just read, is Gam Ze'er Shalemer, she's Shinui Amahus B'chinas HaChochma Guf Madregas HaProdim Shabbat. The Rebbe Rashab is explaining himself. He's saying what I just said is in addition to the fact that the whole discussion here is leaning toward Chochma being a fundamentally different entity than Binah, is that you also cannot say that in Chochma itself there should be a Shinui Amahus, that it should suddenly change course. This addition needs a little explanation, because what's the difference between these two elements? First of all, what's being mashmoyes inyan? Mashmoyes inyan, apparently the Rebbe Rashab is quoting this from other Mamorim that say that Chochma is fundamentally different. So he's saying that is enough reason. So even if I give all these explanations, it doesn't fit into the context of Chochma being fundamentally different. Okay, but in addition, he's also giving a seichel dika reason. It's almost like kralam lisvarihi. Since it says in places mashmoyes inyan means as they state, that chochma is different. So that's number one problem. How could you say that when chochma has asaga? The second thing is that even al pi seichel, and you could try to explain that chochma gets diminished and gets closer to binah. The problem is, how does something move from a state of muhus to mitzias? By the way, if you want the question is, how does it move from wave to particle? Physics doesn't answer that question. Physics just says that it's both or neither, blah blah. But how can it be that it can move from one state to the next? I don't think they don't discuss that. You say the observer observes, fine, but how do we create definition in a world of no definition? How does that happen? So some will say that it never, even when it's defined, it's not defined. But that's not the case here. Here it does get defined. So how does it move from non-definition to definition? That's the question.
See, we're talking about faculty, all the like Chochma and
I understand the way they're in the soul, the way they come into.
Right. So
This is Bugs Bunny.
So
He doesn't know how to do that. He knows how to make the Bugs Bunny sound, but he doesn't know how to shut it off.
so anyway,
It's Keich Abnigvul, doesn't know how to make the Keich Gvul.
no, but there's places that the energy is going. There's energy. When you're talking energy, you're talking about, okay, I can give you a comparison in physics. The biggest concept in the world, that the higher the energy is high only because of frequency. And if we go from seeing frequency to hearing frequencies, we're going low frequency. And not how much mass it is. And you want to make a quantum leap, so to speak, you have to increase the frequency amount, and then finally you get the fission and everything like this. But that's, so where the energy in the moich is going, first it's going to from the state of Chochma. And then after it goes to the state of Chochma, energy is actually going to the faculty of hearing or binah. So it's you have to look at it like that, and I think it'll make much more sense.
You see, but one thing you're not considering in physics, the God particle is not talked about. You're talking about God that's higher than comprehension fundamentally.
Yeah, but that's the source of the energy. That's the source of it. That's where it's coming from upstairs, and it's entering this faculty of the soul, and then it's entering this faculty of the soul. Period.
But the question here on the table is, does Chochma, if it has comprehension, which is already defined by structure, emetzias, and definition, how is that part of Chochma fundamentally different than binah? That's the question here. We understand that it comes. Look, if it all came from Keser, was, let's say, fundamentally different, and Chochma binah is already Gili Helam, that would be much easier to relate to. But he's saying that Chochma basically Chochma has two opposites here. Well, listen, let's continue on. What he's asking. He's going to answer. He's going to answer. He's going to answer. Ayin, there's an answer here. Yeah, this is exciting, right? What exactly is going to be the answer to this one? Ayin, who... However, the answer to this, the Indian in this is, then you do it, the Chochma binah nikra Ayin Beis. It's known that Chochma binah is Ayin and Yesh. What does this mean? A Chochma nikra Ayin, Kamishakosab a Chochma ma'ayin timotze. Chochma is called Ayin. Ayin literally means nothingness. You say something, Ayin, say, it's not there. So you say, Chochma ma'ayin timotze, you mean, Chochma, from where do you come? But if you read it, not as a question, but as a statement, not where do you come, Ayin, it comes from Ayin. That means it comes like when you say, what was that? You get an idea falling to your head, you say, Ma'ayin. Where did that come from? You're really stating that Chochma comes from a place of Ayin. V'abina nikri yesh, k'meshakoshev lahanchil eyevei yesh. So he's bringing back verses. This verse, V'chochma ta'ayin temotza, I must tell you, goes back all the way to chapter Ayin Beis, where he started the whole discussion after saying that Atzilus, from the level of energy, is Gilei Helam, revealing that which is concealed. He asked the question, but then it says Chochma Ma'ayin Temotze, and even the energy of Chochma is also Yesh Ma'ayin compared to higher. So he's bringing that same verse here, just to show you that there's a commonality here. So Chochma comes from Ayin, Binah is Yesh. V'imkein isavus habinah ma'chochma b'chinas Yesh Ma'ayin. I know this sounds technical, but we're going to have to get the havana of it. So therefore, Hisavus binah mi'chochma is Yesh Ma'ayin. Chochma is from Ayin. Actually, you have to say Chochma is Ayin, not Chochma is Yesh Ma'ayin. Earlier he says Chochma is Yesh Ma'ayin. Chochma is Ayin and Binah is Yesh, and therefore one comes to the other is a form of Yesh Ma'ayin.
And not universal.
Correct. That means two different muhusim. 1 second. So how is that going to be consistent? Is then going to say Chochma is yesh ma'ayin compared to higher than it, and also Gilei Helam. Okay, it's going to say both. Fine. I'm just v'hainu sha'ayin the Chochma b'chinas Helam l'gabay yesh the binah. What does this mean? When you say yesh ma'ayin, we've discussed this. What's the difference between yesh ma'ayin and ilah v'ol? Cause and effect. We learned that the effect relates to the cause. It can understand and comprehend the cause. Emotions relate to an intellect, even though they're two separate entities. A student relates to the idea that the teacher is teaching him, even though it's a higher level. Another way to explain ilah v'ol is, as I shared, is it says, I think in Samachay, that ilah v'ol means that if the ilah extends itself, it naturally turns into the ol. Meaning, if a cause extends, it will naturally become the effect. So think of it this way: a river is flowing. If it's naturally flowing and there's no stop blocking it, it will naturally reach another place. Yesh ma'ayin, on the other hand, both things are different. Yesh ma'ayin, number one, the yesh has no comprehension of the ayin. They're not commensurate to each other. They're not that one relates to the other. On the contrary, yesh senses that the ayin is beyond me. That's why I call it ayin. Where? I don't get it. And the second thing is, if an ayin continues to extend, it doesn't become a yesh. You need something to make it become a yesh, because ayin on its own will always remain ayin. Okay. So he says here, Dezewa hefresh. So that's why ayin the chokhin is helam. It's concealed. The gabay yesh the binah, which is revealed. So from point of view of binah, how does it look at chochma as something I don't get? So he's beginning to explain this whole thing a little. Okay. This is the difference between ayin and yesh and ilaval, between nothing and something, or the ilaval who sha'ol, ilaval cause and effect. Sha'ol masagesilose, as I just said. The effect comprehends its cause. And through that, he emerges, he comes into being from the cause. Which means that through the comprehension of understanding its cause, that's what defines and brings them into being.
Even at the level where we spoke Ila and all
even yeah,
but they still
I think so.
Get each other.
Yeah.
So this, you brought the example, I think, of a son and
the moon.
The father, no.
Son and father, yeah. I brought the example of Meich. The example he brought was, remember he said that even in Meichin there's Midas?
Yeah.
So right there you see it. And those Meichin and Midas, even though the Midas and Meichin are just intellectual, correct, but even if they are, but they will give birth, he says that will give birth to the Midas itself. So, in other words, let's put it this way. A person conceives of an idea, thinks about it, gets excited. Midas and Meichin. That excitement, he said, leads to the next level where you also get emotionally excited. That's good for me. He said clearly. First you realize it's good in general, then you realize it's good for me. So you can basically say the emotions that come and say, I love this thing, have now relate to the ilah that said it's a good thing to love. It's not two different worlds. He said Chochma and binah there also, by the way, is the higher level of ilah v'ol. No, fine, but there he's talking. But he says Chochma. There he's talking not to the extent here. There he's still talking on that level. Because remember, they can't contradict themselves. There he's talking Meichin Abba is higher than Ishtalshus at both levels of ilah v'ol. He just wanted to give an example that in Chochma and binah there is an element where they have a commonality.
So you're saying that the ilah recognizes that's what makes it sincere?
More than recognize that it understands that. He said earlier the example.
But that's what makes.
Yeah, that's what defines. Yeah. By the way, the father and son is maybe different than that, because the father and son is a different muhus. Remember, mother and a child is not like a.
Still not. Makir be lost, son.
I don't know.
No.
I don't know if he used. I'm not sure.
I know, he didn't do Tuzinus, and I liked it because it's like it has both.
Okay.
There's a Mitzias Farzik,
Well, let's finish reading and let's see here. Yesh man. Okay. He's talking about Dasoga. He's definitely talking before. He said before two ways it works. One is a student and a teacher. A student becomes a student by understanding the teacher, not by not understanding him. So there's no yesh mayim with student and teacher. It's illavol. I'm talking about the student not as the being of the student. I'm talking about the student as a student of this teacher. So he's in effect the teacher. You could say, I give credit to the Rebbe, he taught me something. So in that sense, it's cause and effect. But it's because I understood my teacher, that's what defined me as a good student. That's in that way. That's the closest way. Then there's even a little not so close. Midas, when you feel something is good for you, is because first you felt in your mind that it was good in general. Your mind told you it's good. That led you to say, you know what, it's good for me. It's two steps. And they're also ill-evolved, but one relates to the next. Yesh ma'ayin hu adrab. Sha'ayin misalim min hayesh. There's no comprehension. Adrab, on the contrary, ayin yesh, the ayin is concealed from the yesh. She'ena masugesi, it does not comprehend or understand it, or appreciate it. And that's what defines it being. In other words, let's put it this way. If you're talking now, yesh ma'ayin would be that if the teacher reveals himself, the student ceases to exist. So there's no ilavol. In other words, bottom line is when two levels are proportionate to each other, it's ilavol. So one, by revealing, it's good, it diminishes part of it. So the other can emerge, diminish. But there's a relationship. If the teacher ceases to speak, the teacher does not teach, or the teacher is so far from the student that there's no communication, you have no ol altogether. So ill of ol is defined by the result is defined by a relationship with the effect, by a revealed relationship. And yesh ma'ayin, the result is defined by no revealed relationship with its source. That's the bottom line. Because of its distance, etc. So really, what defines its mitzias? Is it defined by concealment or by revelation? That's to sum that up. Al shem zeh nikra ayin, al shem she'ena musik, and that's why it's called ayin. What means ayin? That means that I don't understand it. And the same thing is with Chochma and binah, that the ayin of Chochma is concealed from the level of binah. And look into one second. And look inside the siddur, Mitla Rebbe siddur, the Maimer of Mizmer l'Seder.
Binah definitely knows that Chochma exists. The only ayin here is it's no comprehension. Yesh ayin, what we have.
I'm not sure, because he's not yet spelled that out. It's possible, either way. I can see both. Yeah, because we still have to deal with Binah gets his extension of Chochma. Remember that. He's not talking. Yeah, but that's maybe a different way. I don't know how he's going to explain that. He hasn't got to that right now. Now he's talking about the distance part. We're not talking about their relationship yet. Yeah, I'm sure he's going to get to that. He's going to have to discuss that, because that's the whole context. Probably next chapters. If he doesn't, we'll have to get to that. I'm not sure. I don't want to speculate. I first need to hear more of what the distance is. So it's yesh ma'ayin. It still didn't answer the question yet either. We're just at the beginning of the discussion here. Well, the chayre ain't moving, and the chayre apparent and seemingly not understood. Hay nekudas as called the Chochma b'chinas hasaga b'binah. So back to the question here. This nekuda, this spark, the conception in the Chochma comes into a comprehension in binah. V'chol hasagas habinah b'nekudas haskol. It's exactly what you were just talking now. And the whole comprehension of binah is in the point of the point of Chochma, of concept. Ve'ech nikra Chochma ayin legab binah. So how could you call it ayin? Yesh ma'ayin. Binah is comprehending that point, as he's been saying till here. Look, he's building up an answer. He introduced now yesh and ayin. That's the first thing. But binah understands, so how can we call it behechrech lemer? So we have to say, we're compelled to say, shegam nekudas haskola hi b'chinas havdalah ma'binah. So you have to say that even this point of concept in Chochma is in a level of separation from binah. Ad shenikra ayin legaba binah. It's so separate that you have to say that it's called completely not understood in the level of binah. It's a chiddush. Obviously, you could interpret otherwise. That's how he's explaining it. He's explained that there's a quantum leap, a qualitative shift, not just from the riyah of Chochma, but even from the point, the concept of Chochma is also. Because remember, he said before, these are two different muhusim, and you can't say in Chochma that a Chochma should go from one muhus to another. So you have to say, actually, what he's leading to is that the comprehension of Chochma, even if it's seichel, it's in the world of riyah. And it just looks like. Later for sure, I remember later, maybe I'm cheating, but later, hundreds of pages later, he says Chochma just looks like seichel. It's really a lakus. It's camouflages like intelligence. I don't know if that's where he's leading to, but if he does, that would be unbelievable. In other words, it's a lakus that's masangaton in seichel, but it's not seichel that's understanding the lakus. That would be a whole. He says that later for sure. I don't know where they're going there, but we'll soon see. That would be that. You understand what we're talking about here? Now that's a fact. Chassidus is not seichel is understanding a lakus. It's a lakus. It can manifest even in seichel. That's the whole point. Okay, so behechach lemer. Remember, you have to remember, and you can see it from Mashmoy Sinyan and also here behechach lemer, that Rebbe Rashab is building certain axioms. It says in the Maimorim before him, meaning the Alter Rebbe basically, that Chochma binah is ayin yesh, and that, and what he said before Mashmoy Sinyan, that there are fundamentally different levels. So it's not like he's asking a question on himself. He's asking a question. The questions are based on certain things that are stated. Because if not, you could just say, 1 second, why do you have to make the statement l'chachila? Explain the whole thing differently. But it's important to know that these ideas, actually, they exist beforehand, so he's explaining concepts that exist. Plus, with his explanation. I mean, it would be most fascinating in a chapter like this, is to see exactly what it says, the Alter Rebbe or the Tzemach Tzedek or Mittler Rebbe, and seeing what the Rebbe Rashab is analyzing. Because to know what the Rebbe Rashab, because then you really can really understand. Because there's clearly certain things that he's addressing that say. Like, for example, right now he made the statement that means it's a statement. You have to say that Chochma binah ayin yesh. The question I would ask, why do you have to say that? Maybe Chochma binah not ayin yesh. Or whatever. But clearly, as I said, that's a given. So now, let's continue. So you have to say, we're compelled to say, that even the lower levels of Chochma, which is already a concept, are also ayin. Infinitely distant, so to speak. Infinitely distant from, concealed from binah. For who? Here we go. And what does this mean? Who? Sheba'asichli de Chochma gam kemer b'zeh b'chinas etzem. That in the seichel of Chochma, in the intelligence of Chochma, radiates the level of etzem. V'hainu, the menekudas haskol, the Chochma mer b'zeh dakus etzem ein hamuskel. That in the spark of the idea, radiates the subtlety, the sublimeness of the essential concept that is being understood, that is being conceived. That which cannot come into comprehension. Yeah, it's what we're saying here. That's the chiddush that he's adding. Very big chiddush. Remember the whole introduction I gave before this chapter, that Chochma is not such a simple level to understand. So the most we go is Mamatlama, we go is, okay, comprehension. So I go to a conception, I have an idea. But that idea is not so easy to relate to without some binah. Now he's going even further. That idea, the concept, is really radiating something of the etzem that's beyond any comprehension. That's what he's adding now. So it's even more than just the beginning of a concept, beginning of a comprehension. It has something atzmizdik in it. Remember, speaking from top down, you can say this. There's no way that you could figure this out from the bottom up. Because the most you can come to is binah has a source. Okay, I had an idea this morning, and now I'm developing it. But to say my idea is radiating etzem, you have to, what's an etzem? Etzem is higher than consciousness. You're basically saying the unconscious truth is manifesting in the consciousness of Chochma. That's what he's basically saying. He's going to say probably that's why it's a nekuda. That's exactly why it's concentrated. Because it's an etzem. That's why it can't be expressed. That's why Chochma is elusive. Why is Chochma elusive? Because it's not the beginning of binah. It's really the end of something else. So we look at it like this. Think of it like this. We are on the end of the faucet. You turn on a faucet, water comes out. Okay. So if your child asks you, where does water come from? The faucet. You know that behind the faucet there's a big pipe. And behind the pipe there's even bigger pipes. And behind those pipes there's a whole reservoir. And the reservoir comes from the oceans, or from the rivers, or from rain. Till the source. When you look at it from the bottom, from the outside, you see a little drop of water comes out. So okay, binah says, hey, you know what? I just got a drop from Chochma. But if you're able to open the curtain behind Chochma, you find out Chochma is like the end process of a whole reality beyond. That's what's going on here. And we can only see this little drops coming. So that's why Chochma is, he doesn't say it right now, but that Chochma is fundamentally a different reality. It's like the tip of the iceberg. Not the beginnings of binah. That's why it's an interface. You could definitely go from down up, by process of elimination and come to these understandings. Look, the fact is you can come to relate to an unconscious, even though you've never seen it, by process of elimination. Because you have to say, if a person gets angry again and again and again, why are they getting angry? They have to have something inside of them that you can't see that's causing them to be that way. I mean, this is essential therapy, psychology, that you extrapolate. You can't see what's behind the curtain, but you know it's affecting human behavior, so you have to say it's there. It's through so-called ideas hashlila. I always give the example for this is like, let's say you have a dark wall, a wall that's covered in darkness, shrouded in darkness, no light. You can't shine a light on it and you can't touch it. Is there any way for you to find out what this wall looks like? So you think, no, right? You could. You take a ball, and you bounce it on the wall. You bounce it once, comes back like this, so you know it's straight. You bounce, comes like this, you know the wall is crooked. You keep bouncing enough times, every corner of the wall, you can almost make a picture without ever seeing it, without shining a light, by seeing how it bounces back. What is that psychologically speaking? You have a conversation with someone. If you're trained, you can't see what's going on inside them. They probably can't even see what's going on inside them. But you say something. It's like a doctor. He says, does it hurt? No. Does it hurt? It's only, yeah, it hurts. That means there's something here. He goes deeper here till he finds the place, so he knows there's a tender nerve. Same thing psychologically. You start speaking to someone, is it, talk about any issue. You start talking, they say, no. They start telling you, no, it's not the issue, that's where you got to go. Because why do they want to talk about it? So if you're trained through bouncing the ball, you see reactions. And then suddenly someone says to you, it's not that, and they start getting angry. The angrier they get, you hit a nerve. And obviously if you're sensitive and wise, you don't just go after a nerve just because somebody's, you have to know how to walk sensitively. But you recognize from reactions, and you can learn about the unconscious of a person without ever going there, by seeing how they react. And that's what you really want to do. So you can go into a world that's beyond us by doing that, and you realize that world is really where it all shaped. And forget, what you're seeing is only the tip of the iceberg. I'm elaborating a bit more than I think is saying right now, but it is definitely where it's going. But let's go back to this thing. So b'meila, b'hechlech leimer, that by saying that Chochma is Ayin, you have to say that Chochma has in it a radiating element, illumination from the etzem. Behind the Kudsa meir dakus etzem in hamuskel. Masha'iyef shalov lidei asaga. Bezeh shabol lidei asaga rak achitzenius mezeh. And that which you do comprehend is only the external part of that. So right here, he's basically killed the dragon, the idol of Seichel. Where people who are body Seichel think it's all Seichel. Everything I have to understand. If I don't understand it, it means it's out of my league. Faith is the absence of reason. It's basically saying, my friend, is the other way around. Etzem is reality, And when you understand something, you only get an external taste of something. So it's like turning the whole thing over. Does that disturb any of the body seichel here?
I don't get this whole thing of a sikhi, the chochma. Before he basically...
You don't get it, then you're beginning to get it.
Right. But because before he said that there's no nekuda in chochma that doesn't have the etzem of chochma.
We should say l'chaim, because you're not getting it. You understand? Okay. This is Mechus, this is Megillah Helam right behind you.
The fact that, what's the... Before he said that every part of chochma has the etzem of chochma. But we cannot say that it's...
Now he's saying Meir B'Zebchin.
And when you take away the etzem, bleibt the chitzenius, was the sichel never...
So what's the question? Why that's...
How could it be? How could it be that chochma still contains something that is not atzmi, not chochma?
Okay, well, I can't answer that yet until let's finish this point here. 1 second. It's almost the end of the chapter, so we'll finish the matter. It's only the external. The intelligence itself. Not the sensing of the feeling of the essence what's in the point. Because it's known. As explained in many places, in several places, the Nekudas Haskala Meira Er Bigili. That Nekudas Haskala, in the spark, in the concept of thy concept, there radiates, illuminates the air, the energy revealed. And when it comes into comprehension, many details, the energy gets concealed. He said this earlier as well. What radiates in this point of intelligence, is not just the ribuy eir haseichel, an abundance of energy, of intellectual energy. Because the eir seichel, that is the same personality and essence of what is going into comprehension and binah. So what are you saying? You can't say that. So what is radiating there? I'm sorry. No, let me correct that. That means that you can't saying. So this is what he's saying. Because that Eresech also comes into binah.
So you cannot say that.
You cannot say that. Why? Because there you're talking about a quantitative difference. That in the spark of that, like he spoke earlier, at the beginning of the page, in the Havamina, in Poshet, that there you could say, not in the Poshet, I'm sorry, before when he said that in the beginning, that the only difference is quantitative. Chochma is lesser, is more energy, more power, and in Bina is less. Not that. You can't say that. Ki'im, what do you say? Rather, Mashalavad Zeis. Besides this, that he just said that it's lesser energy, that in the spark of the idea, the concept, in the flash of the idea, radiates the essence of the seichel. Which in truth cannot, it's not possible for it to come into comprehension. And when it does come into comprehension, misalam ve'ena meir klal. This part, the atzmi, gets concealed and doesn't radiate at all.
And then it becomes yeshmayin.
Then that makes it yeshmayin. This makes it yeshmayin.
But that cannot be in Chochma.
No, I explained it. I think the Chetzenis makes very much sense. That's why I explained what I explained. Bottom line is, remember the example I gave with the reservoir and the water? Okay. That example is not perfect because the reservoir ultimately is only Gilead Helam. It's water and that's water. But let's, for argument's sake now, let's talk about the conscious and unconscious. Where do ideas come from? They come from a place it's not the place where if you open up you'll find a bunch of ideas. It's a completely different state. It's oyer. It's elokus. He's beyond comprehension at that point. It's unconscious. We're not talking about rots and desire. It's esosphirus hagnuzis, however you want to interpret it. It now goes through a very narrow channel, and it's entering into Hishtalshlus. Chochma is the place, the first opening. Think of it like the beginning of the kav. The first opening where this atzmi is now manifesting in existence. Okay? Let's not even call it seichel yet. It manifests the first state in Chochma. So Chochma fundamentally is like really the tip of an atzmi. Okay? But this atzmi manifests in a way that is going to ultimately turn into something we can relate to. So in the higher levels of Chochma, it remains Riyah, Hisamtus, like you said, that's that. It's that muhus. As it goes to the lower levels, it still remains that muhus. But it's now what we call sichli, it's a concept. The concept has emerged, an idea. Now, initially you can say an idea is simply the beginning of binah. You're saying, no, the idea is the end of atzmi. It's a reflection of an atzmi. And in this idea radiates the atzmi. That's why it's an akuda and so on. Now, and this so then what do we comprehend when we begin to, the yesh begins to understand something? What are we comprehending? So he's saying it's only the chitzenius of that. And you don't sense the atzmi, you understand the comprehension. So when we sit down now and start discussing something in detail, there's a part that it has a chochma, which is the chitzenius of chochma, which allows the binah to emerge. But the atzmi, that which where chochma came from, is now completely concealed. So you can comprehend something in detail and completely miss the point, basically.
But on the other hand, you're saying that still there is something of binah in that.
There's something of chochma in the binah.
Or the other way around.
The chitzenius, yeah.
So chochma carries everything in itself.
Yeah. What he's adding here that was not on this, what is not said before. Before he just said that chochma is a different muhus, and binah is a different muhus. So he asked the question. Chochma is also seichel, the lower levels. What he's adding now is that this seichel of chochma really is radiates atzmi in it. He didn't speak about that before. He didn't mention that. That's the chiddush here. He's adding that element to it that has atzmi in it, and that's what makes it fundamentally different. We didn't finish learning it all, but my assumption is that he's going to say is that the seichel of chochma is really atzmi that looks like seichel. So it's elokus that is coming into seichel. When it comes into seichel, it's still in chochma radiates the essence of it. But because it's come into a thing called seichel, there's another stage that can turn it into hasaga, comprehension, and it can lose touch. It could lose. It doesn't have to lose touch. But there, the etzem is concealed. Why is that not understood? It's tzimtzum because it's not really tzimtzum. It's more because as soon as you go into details, as soon as you understand something, you lose some of its truth. Basically, that's what happens because it's me understanding. Remember, we spoke about midas. That as soon as you think if it's good for me, you can no longer have the gili of mechin because you're ready. Yeah. So in binah and chochma b'daka is the same thing. Binah is yesh. Binah means I understand. As soon as you understand, you can't have. It's like what I said with Moshe before, right? You can't if you look at it too closely. Now you could relate it, but you have to have a certain element of getting out of yourself. Look, he's not finished. There's another chapter, I believe, at least. Huh? I think 2 more. Huh? No. But I'm talking about this. I think Mem Beis and Mem. Huh? Okay, so we're trying to understand what he said in this chapter. All I'm doing here is right now. Let's just add what he added here. Were a few points. I'm going to summarize. He asked the question. The l'cheira chochma is not just riyah. There's also hasaga. There's also comprehension. Some type of the beginning of binah. All the details that he asked. Okay. Then he said, but Pashas, maybe you can explain that all this is a diminishing within Chochma. Said, no, you can't say that because there's no such thing as that something within itself should change its muhus. Which we still need to maybe analyze why you can't say that, because the first reason that you can't say is because it says Chochma and Binah are two different muhus, like it says Mashmas Inyan. That I understand, but why something can't change its muhus? Not clear why. My thinking is right now is because if it changes muhus, it needs another force outside of it to change it. Because why would it change? How could something, a personality, suddenly change its colors? So you'd have to say there's another force in it, which is anyway the answer. That atzmi. That's why I think he's going to say. But I don't want to speculate about that. But bottom line, he said that it does not change. Therefore, you have to say. So back to the question. And his answer was Ayin Yesh. To establish that Chochma and binah are two fundamental different worlds, Ayin and Yesh. It's similar to what he said before, two different fundamental worlds, but now he explains what Ayin and Yesh are. That El va'Olah there's a relationship. In Ayin and Yesh there's no relationship, not revealed relationship rather. And bottom line is that Chochma is Meir Atzmi. That's the bottom line. The Atzmi is Meir. Now this is, you could say, he said it earlier, but he's not spelling it out now. He's spelling it out in detail, in graphic detail. And therefore binah is Yesh Ma'ayin from it. So what still needs to be understood is where Hasaga meets beyond Hasaga. That's what needs to be still. We're still in that place. I said, no, listen. This is the next chapter. He's going to speak about it. I believe another 3 chapters is Chochma and binah.
He's explaining it.
42.
You feel a little better because it's so confusing here.
I believe 42 and 43 are the last chapters of Chochma and binah. Then he moves on to the next stage. So 42. Now the thing is, I am out of town now for the next week. So you can learn it yourself, obviously.
Out of town from tomorrow?
From tonight. You can learn on your own, and I'm definitely going to learn. I'm very intrigued.
Next year will be when?
Thursday morning.
A week from this Thursday.
Yeah, because Wednesday I'm coming early. I don't think it will be. Let me just read the Kitzur. We still have to understand, isn't the Nekudas HaSkala the point still is a Sichli, is intelligence? You can't say that Sichli is the diminishing within Chochma b'shvil habina in order for binah to emerge. Because then it's a shinui mahus, it's fundamentally different entity. The answer is Chochma is Ayin, or binah me Chochma hu yesh ma'ayin, she'enu musik. And binah coming from Chochma is a new entity, that meaning she'enu musik. It's not understood. And that's because in the spark of the idea radiates the essence of the seichel that's higher than comprehension.
The lowest part of Chochma is
Yeah. So we'll stop here. We did page 70-71, chapter 41.
Okay, have a good day.